Can someone look Episcopalian?
Well, I mean, as a convert, I think Chris is the one who can
Oh,
testify to
that's
this.
true. That's true. I mean, can someone look Catholic?
Yeah, this is we have now actually, Paola. I think today's the day.
This is a very millennial kind of day.
Today's the day. We are recording, right, Chris? Yeah.
Yes,
okay.
we are.
So
We've already
today's
started.
the day that Roar Like the Lamb truly becomes a Catholic podcast.
It's St. Patrick's Day
It's
month.
only taken us 3 years to get to this point to finally become truly Catholic. Because Paola, again, would you just show the camera? I know that some people are just listening to this, but for those of you who can't see it, Paola's got herself a little what's left of her Baileys. Yes, it is. It's not 5 p.m. here, at least. I'm sure it's 5 p.m. somewhere.
When we started.
But Paola is.
Listen, I wasn't the only one drinking in the office. Okay, that sounds so
that makes
bad.
it sound like I'm not running a tight ship. I have given up alcohol for the Lents, and I carved out for myself the St. Patrick's Day party and St. Patrick's Day itself for as my free pass so that I could. But like the rest of Lent, no. So when it was offered to me, because our seniors today had their St. Patrick's Day luncheon,
such a party.
They had a great time.
They partied really well.
There was some Baileys that made its way back to the parish office.
A very big thing of Baileys.
Yes. This will be. How you feeling, Paola?
I'm feeling a little light.
Just so you know, this is not quite a normal sized helping of Baileys. It's significantly less than that. But
No, it's because I'm a lightweight. That's why. That shouldn't be a secret. Now everybody knows. Now you all know.
At the very least, this is going to be entertaining. So.
Yeah, no, it was funny. Kim came around. She goes, "Do you want a shot of Baileys?" And we were like, "Yeah." And then Terry, of course, has given up her wine for Lent, as she does for Lent and Advent.
Yeah, but Baileys isn't wine.
That's what we said.
Baileys is not wine.
She goes, "It doesn't matter." So anyways, we were all in my office and we're cackling. Terry comes in. She goes, "All right, I'm going to get the drink away from you ladies. There's too much laughter going on in this office."
Wow.
It was great.
It's fantastic. In addition, you might, if you're watching the video of this podcast, you might notice our new fancy backdrop.
It's a really nice backdrop.
Yeah, it's really beautiful. It's almost like it's a real podcast now. See that? Yeah. It's a whiteboard.
It's a very millennial.
It's a whiteboard, and Paola and I doodled as well on the whiteboard. So, like,
I called that ass the thingy. We used to call it Superman.
Yeah. So those of you who are of the millennial generation will understand the doodle S that you used to do with the 3 lines and then 3 lines and then you have to connect it all.
And then you can make a
pointy
cool. At the top, pointy at the bottom.
The coolest thing you could possibly do, and when you finally learn from somebody how to do that, like you've really truly arrived, and that's the way. It's great. Anyway, hey Paola.
I can't help it. Chris is doing something. I don't know what he's doing. Oh, he left.
It's for the best in this case, because you'd definitely not be able to handle it.
No, I would not. I don't even know what it was.
Oh man.
I'm doing great, but it feels jokingly. It feels like I've been drinking since Saturday night.
I don't know why.
Well, because the parish party, there's too much. There's a lot happening at St. Pius.
I would like to record all Roar Like the Lambs after you've had some Baileys from now on. Thank you. Oh my goodness. This is great.
Oh my goodness.
So much fun.
Oh, no. We don't want to do too much. Then I'm going to take a nap.
All right. Well, can I share something with you that just came up recently?
Yes, please.
There is folks of your charity, please offer a prayer for his soul. Father John Kachuba. Father John Kachuba is the son of the cousin of my grandfather.
That's cool.
Yeah. I unfortunately never had the chance to meet him. He passed away recently. He was a Ukrainian Rite or Byzantine Rite priest in the Byzantine Eparchy of Parma, Ohio. So I never had the chance to meet him, but he passed away after celebrating the Divine Liturgy for the sisters at Christ the Bridegroom Monastery.
Oh, wow.
Now, if you are interested in Catholic podcasts and have ever heard of Christ the Bridegroom Monastery, it might be in conjunction with Mother Natalia.
No way.
Mother Natalia has made a pretty big impact in the Catholic podcasting scene.
Wow.
And everything. And she has her own podcast called What God Is Not with Father Michael Laughlin.
Yeah.
And I think she's made some pretty big contributions in other places, and really seems like a lovely human being. I've not had the chance to meet her, but somebody had asked me if there was any relation to Father John Kachuba, because Kachuba is not really a name that you're going to hear all that often, right?
Yeah.
And so I said, yeah, we're related. It's a distant relationship, and I've never actually had the chance to meet him, but he looks a tremendous lot like my uncle John.
Wow.
Kachubas are not very creative in naming their men. For generations, it was John, Joseph, Stephen, or Michael.
Matthias, I'm kidding.
No, Michael. John, Joseph, Stephen, or Michael. Those were the 4 Kachuba male names, and then
What's your dad's name?
Michael.
Okay. Oh yeah, Mike Kachuba. That's right.
Yeah. And so we had, my uncle's John, my dad's Mike.
What's your brother's name?
Well, this is where it gets a little thrown off. So my grandfather John, his brother Joe, had a son who he named Donald. And so the Kachuba male naming streak was broken, but I'm pretty sure he's Donald Joseph. So the name stayed. And so then my dad and his brother both continued it. So my cousin's name is Matthew John. I'm Samuel Stephen. Okay. And my brother is Gabriel Michael. Oh. So the names all stuck somehow in the middle name. So they've continued on.
That's right.
But you see, even here's this third cousin of mine, and I think there were 4 brothers who came from Ukraine to the United States and then kind of scattered. So that's how it ended up being this way. Anyway, so Mother Natalia was on the Being Human podcast with Dr. Greg Bottaro. So a few weeks ago she was on, and I saw in Father John's obituary that he had said the Divine Liturgy for them there, and somebody had asked me, because I think Mother Natalia had mentioned him on her podcast, had mentioned something that he had said, some spiritual insight that he gave to her. So I said to Greg Bottaro, do you have Mother Natalia's information? I'd like to send her a note and just offer my prayers and condolences. So I sent her a note, and I offered the prayers and condolences. She got back to me today, and I was really excited to get this note from her. First, because it just confirmed that I had, in fact, sent the correct email address, the email. I get worried about that sometimes. If I don't hear back from somebody, I'm like, oh, man. But I figured it's also Lent, and she's a nun in a monastery, so she probably doesn't have internet access super frequently, because that would seem like a pretty normal thing, right?
Seems pretty normal.
Yeah. So she gets back to me and thanked me for the note, and she said, Father John had something of a gruff and grumpy exterior, but a very tender heart. And I thought to myself, that is exactly how I would have described my grandfather and most of all of the Kachuba men who I've ever known in my life. A gruff and grumpy exterior, but a really tender heart.
So you're crusty on the outside, soft on the inside?
It just made me realize that I think there is a genetic trait that is carried by Kachubas, just broadly speaking, that our menfolk tend towards sometimes being a little bit gruff and grumpy. If like my dad wrote a little essay about his father, and he said he did not suffer fools well, and that is a trait he passed on to me and that I have passed on to my sons. And I'm like, yeah, that's it. It's amazing. So I'm blaming genetics and
blaming
not
genetics
at all.
for you.
This is entirely, the question is it nature versus nurture? This is entirely nature. It's not nurture.
Interesting.
Yeah. This isn't about my woundedness or anything like that. It's definitely just the genes.
No, definitely not. That's so interesting. Huh.
Yeah.
Because in our personalities passed down? People say that, but then I wonder how much of it is learned.
Well, there's so much of
behaviors.
personality that it's definitely learned. There's so much that is learned behavior. But then I think there are certain things that come as something more of a genetic disposition. And I don't know enough about the genetics and what the psychologists have said, what their studies are, but
it's interesting.
Yeah. Anyway, so of your charity, please say a prayer for Father John Kachuba. May his memory be eternal. That's what they say in the East, I think.
That's really cool too. When
beautiful.
you kept mentioning John, Michael, Joe, whatever, all these names. So I had a scene from a big fat Greek wedding in my head, and this is Nick, Nikki, Nicholas, Nikki, and that's Vicky. I think Vicky's the last one.
Yeah.
So that's exactly what I was thinking about. It's like, oh, okay, you just have more just don't have a variation of Nick. You have a variation of 4 names,
Right, exactly.
and you just make it happen.
Speaking of Greek and Nick,
My Big Fat Greek Wedding 3 is coming out in about a year or 2.
there was My Big Fat Greek Wedding 2?
Yeah,
No.
yeah. It was so sad. They divorced.
No.
And then she went to Greece to become a tourist, like a tour guide.
I don't appreciate that.
Yeah, I know. But they're all coming back for a 3rd one, so we'll see what happens.
Okay.
Such a great movie.
Interesting. Well, yesterday, my little cousins who are Greek Orthodox, I have Greek Orthodox in the family, right?
I didn't know that.
I do, yeah.
Wait, really?
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. So they had a basketball game at the Greek Orthodox Church in Bridgeport. Mm-hmm. So they said, you're in the neighborhood, why don't you come over? Sure. So I went over, I got to see the game. And in addition to getting to see their game, I had the chance to meet their priest, Father Nick. And
Father Nick.
let me tell you, all right.
Oh my gosh.
Look, there was some cultural stuff happening that I thought was actually very beautiful.
Yeah.
Very, very powerful stuff where like you go in and you realize this is a Greek Orthodox Church basketball league. And so the various Greek Orthodox churches in the area have a basketball team for their kids, and the kids all. So there's a tremendous amount of Greek culture that's happening for these kids, and they're all together in this. So there's this commonality, kind of spread throughout, where there's a lot of cultural stuff that's included. So I thought that was something really powerful. But I was watching as one of the assistant coaches was getting upset about something that one of the kids was doing, and he was kind of exasperated. And the head coach walked over to him and took his cheeks in both hands and just kind of held his face for a little while and then kissed him on the forehead as he calmed him down. And I thought, this is a very different way of coaches interacting. And like at the CYO League at the Cardinal Sheehan Center, I've never seen a coach cup another coach's face in his hands tenderly and kiss him gently on the forehead. But like I think this is the kind of thing that I'm like, I was watching a scene out of My Big Fat Greek Wedding, and I thought it was great. But then I got to meet Father Nick, and let me tell you, this guy, he's a young priest. My cousin introduced me to him, and he immediately said, "Father Sam, it's great to meet you," and he hugged me.
Aww.
And it was this very fraternal, very genuine, very sincere, and I was really moved by how he did that. And then he just looked at me and said, "Thank you for your ministry." And I'm like, I've known you for all of 12 seconds.
Wow.
Because it was kind of a long hug,
That is amazing.
Here's this. Thank you for your ministry. Wow, this is something really powerful.
Yeah.
And then I was thinking, here's this guy. His 2 kids were on the team because Greek Orthodox priests are often married men who become priests, right?
Yeah.
So his 2 kids were on the team with my little cousins. Mm-hmm. And before the game started, they gathered both teams at the center court with the referees, and the ref, who's also a Greek guy, explained, he said, "Congratulations on those are the finals of their tournament." Mm-hmm. So finals for 5th grade basketball, it's a big deal, right? And so he gathers them all at the center court, and the ref gives them a little pep talk. He says, "Congratulations to both teams on making it this far, but remember this: we're all Greek, and we share this culture, and we share this faith." Father Nick led them in prayer, and so everybody, all the crowds, all the spectators are standing up praying with him. So he prayed the Our Father, and then he had this other prayer, and then watching, because the Greeks will do like a triple sign of the cross at the end of their prayers, and watching all the kids just immediately do it. I was really moved by it. I thought there's something powerful here, and there's this cultural aspect. Mm-hmm. And I think this goes to what our bishop is talking about now for us here in the Diocese of Bridgeport, kind of creating and recreating or forming maybe out of nothing a new sense of culture. Yeah. Of the Catholic faith being something that is tangible in everything that we do.
Interesting.
Yeah. Huh. So I was really moved to see how this all happens, that you get these kids, and this is a thing in the Greek Church. In the Orthodox churches, rather, and then you'll also see this often in the Eastern rites of the church.
Yeah, makes sense.
In the Byzantine rites, there's a not only the faith component, but a deep cultural component. Often it's in the Eastern rites. That's where they preserve their language. So if you go to a Ukrainian rite church, the people who go to the Ukrainian rite church, their children also go there for Ukrainian school, where they're going to be taught the Ukrainian language. They're going to be taught Ukrainian traditions and culture and dance and things like that. Yeah. And so these kids are learning their culture while also learning their faith, and it's all tied in. Now, that's I'm not sure this is the right word. Let me say it this way, and you can correct me if you think it's wrong. It's kind of a monolithic thing. It's only one culture. Whereas as Latin Rite Catholics, Latin Rite tends to embrace many cultures, right?
Yeah,
and so
there's
you're not
more
going to have
spaces.
just one thing happening. And so sometimes we used to have ethnic parishes, but they were Latin Rite parishes. And if anything, the thing that we had in common was the rite of our faith, the way in which we celebrated the Mass. The way in which we celebrated the sacraments was the same, even though a language group might differ, certain other cultural traditions would be different. In the Eastern rites, they tend to have it's one culture, and so it's this culture tied to this particular rite. In the Orthodox Church, the same thing. This particular culture tied to this particular Orthodox church. So there's something of a unity of culture that can be present there, whereas in a parish like ours, that is not just one ethnicity, but many.
Yeah.
Granted, mostly white.
Yes, I was going to say that.
Like, we're not super diverse, right? Like,
That's not
like
super.
when you came to the St. Patrick's Day party, Paola, like you were kind of the diversity
I was
quotient.
literally, listen.
You were the most diverse person there.
I walked in and I was like, oh man, I'm out of my element. It was fine. Like I knew a couple of people, but wait, no, I'm being dead serious. Like that's the first thought I thought about. I was like, whew, this is overwhelming. Then no one sat with me, so like I was sitting alone for 10 minutes.
It's not that no one sat with you; it's that the people who were supposed to be at your table,
they just didn't sit with me.
No, they weren't there yet.
You can't sit with us.
No, they weren't there yet. They hadn't even gotten there.
Some of them were there, but she was the one organizing the whole event. So thank you, Liz Feeney. It was fine. But then Luana comes in, okay? So we're really like the only people of color in that space.
It's kind of true.
No, it literally was. We were just like, well, we're the diversity option here.
Look, every party needs to have a little bit of diversity, and you guys brought it, and I'm grateful. Thank you. Thank you. Let it not be said that St. Pius is not a diverse place. I can prove it.
It was funny. So Luana, at one point, I wanted to take a picture of people after Mass, so I just did a quick video scan because I'm like trying to put together a reel. And so she sees what I'm doing, and she's like, "Hold on a second, let me make sure I'm in front of you so we can show that there is some diversity at St. Pius."
Look, there's some things you can't control.
No, there isn't.
Right?
It's just. I mean, it's a neighborhood parish. It's like, and you can go deeper into that, how like certain neighborhoods are a particular grouping of people. But that's just kind of how it's always been.
Yeah.
So
well, this is the thing that you once had. All right.
Yeah.
In for the Latin Rite, you would have this neighborhood became a heavily Italian neighborhood. This neighborhood was a heavily Irish neighborhood. This neighborhood was heavily French Canadian or Portuguese or something like that.
Yeah.
Those neighborhoods have turned over, and a lot of those neighborhoods now would be heavily Hispanic. And then as people, especially as you get out of the city, the farther you get from the city, in at least suburban areas, the more you have kind of a blending of people from all these different backgrounds. So once upon a time, maybe my family came from a heavily Italian neighborhood, but now my family lives here in this town, and in this town there's a Polish family across the street from us, there's an Irish family on the other side of us, and so there's just much more in the way of diversity. What I think our bishop is getting at with this idea of the one, he talks about the one and how, when he was growing up in Brooklyn, he had the Italians all in the neighborhood. Everybody was Italian, and therefore everybody was Catholic.
Yeah.
And so when you're surrounded by Italian Catholic Americans all around, he said, I had dozens of aunts and uncles. None of them were actually related, right? But he was surrounded by all of these people who supported his family, and they supported the family life. They supported their faith life. There was a sense that on this day or at this time, everybody was going to be going to Mass. Everybody was planning for this next event, this next thing that was going to take place. And there's something really powerful about that because it ties the practice of the faith to other important things, to other important milestones. It ties even the civic celebrations and observations to something rooted in your faith and in your family, because the very same people who you would see at Mass, in school, Catholic school, would be the very same people who you would see then at the parade or at the supermarket or something else. So the idea was that the community really became this place where it was all one. There wasn't a separation between different places.
Yeah.
So I occupy this space when I'm at school. I occupy this space when I'm at church. For him, there was just the one. And I think when we're talking about how the faith is presented and how the faith is lived out, whenever we can have more of the one, whenever there can be that sense that, yeah, all right, when we play basketball, it's okay for us to pray. And when we're playing basketball, we're also surrounded by people who share in our values and our culture and everything. There's something really powerful about that.
Yeah, there is.
Now, at the same time, for a lot of the Orthodox or the Eastern Rite faithful, in order for them to go to Mass, they've often got to trek quite a ways. And so you'll find that they might choose to live somewhere that's close to where they have a church, where there's a Greek Orthodox church, or they're coming in from sometimes an hour away or more.
Yeah.
And so they have to make more of a commitment. Well, if they're going to be making that kind of a commitment to go there, then they're also going to spend the extra time to foster that sense of community and culture and family with the extended community. Whereas when you have a church right in your backyard, as we tend to do, because as Catholics, as Roman Catholics, we kind of overplant. We have lots of parishes,
Yeah.
right?
Wow, that's a good way to put it. We definitely replanted.
Yeah. So if we have all of these Catholic parishes that we can go to, there's always one right in our backyard, and so the commitment to get to Mass is less difficult. It doesn't take as much for us to find a Mass.
Right.
There's plenty within a very short distance. And so if there's less that we have to do in order to get to Mass, then we might spend less time with the people, because it's like, let me just, like, I can kind of catch Mass.
Yeah.
Plus our Masses are shorter than what the Divine Liturgy is. The Divine Liturgy tends to run 2 hours or longer sometimes. And so when we have like the shorter Mass and this stuff happening, yeah, it can create some challenges, I think.
Yeah.
So anyway, it's just, I was noticing at the basketball game how there was this real sense of culture and family, and I thought it was, first of all, very beautiful. I speak in this, I mean this in the most complimentary way. I thought it was awesome to see. And thinking, how do we cultivate and foster that kind of culture in our own parish life and in our own family life, right? That there are these things, if we make the right choice. And have you heard of the Benedict option?
Yeah.
I'm kind of bouncing right now to like.
Yeah. No, I've got a couple thoughts, but keep going.
Well, I mean, the Benedict option, which I think he's presenting an interesting idea. I'm not all in.
Yeah.
Entirely, but there's some really sensible things that he's saying, like live around people who share your values and who you want to be friends with. Be intentional about forming community.
Yeah.
And sometimes you have to opt out.
Yeah.
You have to opt out of certain things, and when you opt out, you need support. So, you're not meant to be alone in that. So, if you're trying to withdraw and protect your family from some of the more difficult forces that are out there, and they are out there,
Right.
you need some support. You can't just do it by yourself.
Right.
At the same time, I'm not entirely sure he gets the entire picture exactly right, but he's taken a stab at it, and so I appreciated the effort.
Yeah.
Right. But the Benedict option is more like, we're going to withdraw from the world and create our own little enclave.
Kind of like a little cul-de-sac.
Yeah. Whereas what I notice with the Greek Orthodox is that this is a place where they're really together, but at the same time, my cousin who's coaching the basketball team, he's also a volunteer firefighter, and he's working on his EMT certification. So he's doing all of this stuff for his community that has nothing to do with being Greek Orthodox.
Yeah.
But I wouldn't believe for a second that there's not something of his sense of family and responsibility that isn't influencing that. And where does that come from? That comes from his faith.
Yeah. I think it's interesting because I'm thinking of our friend Julie and how she mentioned, like, she is half Greek, and her dad was a Greek Orthodox, but she was not Greek enough for the Greeks, but also too Greek for other spaces. I guess something like that. So for her, it was interesting how it affected her own faith life and how it eventually led her to the Catholic Church, to the Roman Rite.
Yeah.
Because can we have too much of an insular Catholicism that it actually kind of deters people from coming in, actually, and actually pushes people away.
Yeah.
So it's actually something we've been talking in my cohort and just kind of sharing some thoughts. And I was like, yeah, I could see that. It could be like a very cul-de-sac Catholicisms, I guess is what Dr. Brian puts it as. And I could see that. It's actually, there's so much beauty that's here, but there's so much that we do where it's like it's the only thing. To the Benedict option, like, this is the only way that we're going to be able to, like, make it in this world.
Yeah.
Kind of like shun, not necessarily shun, but, draw away. I don't know. it's hard because the world is so diverse. People's cultures are so diverse. And so what does it mean for the gospel that is for all people, for all cultures, for all nations? What does that oneness look like? Yet, how does that also maintain the diversity that the Holy Spirit allows for? Because, we aren't supposed to be like these cookie cutter Catholics either. But there is a temptation to just kind of do that and be there. Like, we're all going to listen to the same podcast, the same music, the same kind of books.
Well, look, everybody should be listening to Roar Like the Lamb. Come on, we know that.
I think it's an interesting
That's why
invitation.
we got this fancy backdrop.
That's exactly why we got the fancy backdrop. Because because what I was thinking about this too, and it is a discussion, like why, when we look at the evangelical church, like they do have more diversity in their churches. But then obviously in the Catholic churches, depending on where you're at, more often they are kind of ethnic based, because I think that's how it always had been in America, like ethnic based churches. But also like culture was very much a part of creating that community when, certain communities were being persecuted, during those times. But one thing I didn't know, because I fell upon some research and I was like, I did not know that only 3% of the Catholic population is Black. I was like, wow.
In the United States.
In the United States,
yeah.
Yes. Obviously,
Because
Africa, we have Africa.
I was going to say,
It's
Africa's
the biggest,
the fastest growing church in the
It's
world.
the fastest growing church, but it just kind of made me think about...
So an interesting thing that we could talk about on that particular score. Number one, I think when we're talking about diversity, we should be careful that we're not talking about diversity for the sake of diversity.
Agreed.
Like,
Yes.
We don't mean it in the sense of...
No, not in the social justice-y sense.
Well, even then,
this,
there was... oh, man, I can't remember what I was listening to, but they were talking about social justice. And it's actually that if you don't recognize that to be social justice minded, go ahead, have some more Baileys. If you don't...
You're going to tell people this.
Oh, no, we do. We absolutely do. This conversation's getting serious.
I was getting thirsty and there's no other option on the table, okay?
Yes, Baileys. It quenches your thirst.
Continue.
What was that old 90s commercial? Obey your thirst. Baileys. No, it wasn't Baileys. Anyway. First of all, when we're talking diversity, it's not in the secular sense of social justice.
Yeah.
I was listening to a Catholic commentator recently, and he was talking about this. He said, look, if we understand what social justice is, working for the betterment of humanity and the salvation of souls, and so that means we take care of the poor and the sick and the needy. These are all the things that Jesus tells us to do.
Yeah.
And so true social justice is simply following what Jesus tells us to do. That's it.
Yeah, that's...
However,
works of mercy.
The social justice banner has in many cases been picked up by people who are not interested in promoting the gospel at all.
Right.
And so sometimes we have a tendency to fall into using words with their secular equivalents.
Right.
And it's worthwhile to be careful. So when we're talking diversity, the church speaks in many different tongues.
Yes.
Right? The church looks... There's no one set way that a Catholic should appear.
Yeah.
The church transcends culture and space. And in fact, the church teaches very strongly about the importance of inculturation. That is, that those elements of a culture, wherever that culture may come from, that are good, can and certainly should be retained. Just because we believe in Jesus doesn't mean that we have to get rid of every single cultural thing. And in fact, language itself, this is like a Tolkien thing. Language is a foundational piece of what makes a culture. And so the language gives you some sense of the outlook on the world that this particular culture promotes. So when we're speaking about diversity, we're saying there's a lot of worthwhile things that are out there in various cultures that can be brought into the way that we practice the faith. Then, because the Catholic faith goes out to all nations, we're going to see all these different races and things. Interesting, if you read Mike Aquilina, he's got a book, the Africa and the Roots of the Early Church, I think it's called. Oh. Fascinating. And he's writing about how when we speak about Africa, we can be speaking about Roman Africa. Roman Africa was like Northern Africa, right? So Northern Africa, which now would be Libya and Tunisia and things. Yeah. So that part of Africa above the Sahara, Egypt is kind of its own thing, and then Ethiopia and South. Yeah. And so when we're especially speaking about the early church, Roman Africa was actually really important. In fact, the first Latin Christian writers came from Northern Africa. not from Rome. The first people writing in Latin were Roman citizens, but from Africa.
Yeah.
And this is a pretty important thing, because when you realize that even in Rome, the place where Latin was the language, the most commonly spoken and written language in the city of Rome was still Greek. Greek and Latin coincided and shared space. Yeah. But Greek was often the language of commerce and also the language of academics. Latin was still developing into that kind of a language.
Oh.
The Roman Empire exported Latin as sort of the unifying language that would help to identify you as Roman, as belonging to the Roman Empire.
Right.
But what Mike Aquilina points out is that when you read the accounts of the early church in Africa and the interaction of the early African fathers with Italian fathers and other fathers of the church from the Mediterranean world, and northern Mediterranean and European areas and everything, he says, you don't hear any discussion of race. They describe where the person is from, and they might describe their physical appearance, but it seems that in the ancient Roman Empire, your race was not nearly as important. Over time, we started to categorize more by race.
Interesting.
Right, so that's a more recent development.
Yeah.
It's not that race doesn't exist or anything like that. It's simply that if you look at the early church, they didn't really care. What they cared about was where are you from,
right,
and what do you believe.
Exactly.
So the substance was really what mattered, not the external appearance.
The Being Human podcast had a really good episode on this. It's a couple episodes ago. Dr. Greg was, who was he talking to?
I don't know, but they've gotten 2 shout-outs in this. So
oh no, they have. We're
gonna have to link in the show notes to the Being
gender,
Human podcast,
culture,
to
and
what
Catholicism.
God is not. Yeah.
But it was really good. It was gender, culture, and Catholicism, and he talked about how Pope Benedict had recommended, like, we're now at a time in the history of the world where we have to look to other cultures for a greater understanding of the gospel. Like we it's no longer just kept to a Western way of thinking, which is how it had grown, but within its space. But now with all the access to all these other cultures, new pathways are open, essentially. Like there's things that we can learn from other cultures,
and even that we have to nuance that.
Yes,
with
exactly.
what we're talking about, because
right, it has to go back to what is objectively true according to who God is and Scripture.
Right, and understanding that there's a way to communicate the gospel that can meet the needs of each individual culture.
Yes.
So if I encounter somebody who speaks this particular language, well, the best way for me to learn how to communicate the gospel is to learn how that language works. How do I translate this into this language for them? And sometimes, and if you look back historically, you can see it's the failure to understand individual cultures that leads to conflict.
Yes.
When you strive to understand the culture, you're still going to find conflict, because no matter how hard I try,
right,
because I am from America and because I'm of this century and this time, there are certain things that I cannot enter into about this other culture.
Yeah.
That doesn't mean I can't try to understand
or try to learn.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But like, I can go into a place and feel something uncomfortable about that culture, or maybe not be super willing to try something that they do.
Yeah.
And it's not because I'm rejecting that culture or I'm trying to be offensive or anything. It's just that's not my culture, and so I'm not ready for something like that.
So something that she said on the podcast. So she's a Louisiana Catholic, so she's a Cajun, Raging Cajun Catholic, which says a lot. So there's a lot of culture and faith already in that one description. But one thing that struck me was she said how cultures had certain ways of kind of dealing with society, or the building blocks of society. So that in a particular part in the United States with Native Americans, if a man failed to respond to the home or to the house, he would kind of be kicked out of like the teepee or wherever they were living. And it was a reflection to the rest of the community that this man is not a man, but he's a boy. But that there was a remedial process for him to really become the man that he's supposed to. And with the influx of just of Westerners coming in, it kind of took away what they had already built, what they had in there. And then she said, now you see a lot of Native American reservations, but what do they deal with? They suffer from alcoholism, single parent homes. It's as if there was no, appreciation for the culture, and so then they took on like this generational trauma from.
Yeah.
So it was just so fascinating to hear that and to think about that, and I was like, wow, this is really interesting. But look at the effects of that, where that culture wasn't invited and respected in such a way where we can kind of assimilate that, and like where's the gospel invited into this, but it had a very, very opposite effect.
Well, if you look at that number that you cited before, that there's such a small percentage of Catholics in the United States who are black, if you go back to a time of desegregation, and here in the Northeast, it wasn't really a thing that we really had very much of.
Right.
But if you talk, for example, to Father Colin Blatchford, who is from Tennessee, he'll tell you that in Knoxville, Tennessee, in the Diocese of Knoxville, and I think in the city of Chattanooga itself, they had one of the largest, most active parishes was a black Catholic parish. And when desegregation became the norm, the diocese forcibly changed parishes. And so they basically shut down the black parish and said, all of you are gonna be part of this parish. We're integrated. That we can't have a segregated parish.
Yeah.
Instead of recognizing that this parish was vibrant in its own right, was large and active in its own right.
Yeah.
And so, I mean, historically, we'd look back and go, so in the name of desegregation, you closed the black church.
Yeah.
And forced them to go to the white church as a way of saying we're desegregating. Well, what happened was a lot of people in this particular place simply stopped going to church.
Yeah.
And so more than one generation of Catholics essentially was
Wiped
lost.
out. Yeah.
In the name of something good. Desegregation is good.
Yeah.
Right? Like you shouldn't be not allowed into my church because of your race. Right? I shouldn't be kept out because I don't look like everybody else. So in the name of something good, something bad happened. And you realize there's a loss of culture. And this is the thing. If we see something that's happening, this is a thing that the church actually teaches. If there is something good in a culture and it's not causing problems, it's not immoral, it is not contrary to the gospel,
Right.
don't touch it.
Yeah.
Leave it alone.
Yeah.
But this is where we're at now as a church.
Yeah.
We are now at a moment in history where we've lost sense of what a healthy culture looks like. We're living we know it's a divided culture. We're living in a time when there's confusion about the difference between right and wrong. And where the loss of a sense of culture and community.
Loss of belonging.
And nature abhors a vacuum.
Yeah.
And when that loss happens, something will step in to fill it.
Yeah.
And the things that have stepped in to fill that vacuum that was left by a loss of cultural identity, well, it's been filled by things that are either not intellectually honest or that are morally destructive.
Yeah.
Or that cause other sorts of spiritual ills. So the necessity to recover a true Catholic culture is very, very pressing.
Go back to the root word, universal.
Right. And when we recover a true Catholic culture, we realize that our culture does not divide us along various ethnic lines, except insofar as our languages contribute to the richness of our culture.
Yeah, because there's also like the societal piece that is speaking into like how we experience church. So it's like, to your point, being able to understand what kind of definition we're using here, because that's important. Because what was the word that you had said?
Well, this is the example that I would use.
Yeah.
Of a place where I've always felt very welcome. Anytime I have ever gone to a Spanish church, a Spanish-speaking church, before I was a priest even, before I was wearing a Roman collar. Like as a priest, you walk in and everybody's like, "Hi, Father, how are you? Thanks for coming." Before I was a priest, I would walk into a Spanish-speaking church community for a mass or for something, and it's like nobody batted an eye that I was there. and I stuck out like a sore thumb, right?
You were very aware.
Yeah. Well, I'm taller than everybody. I'm never taller than anybody anywhere. So I was taller than everybody. I'm lighter skinned than everybody. And I have an accent when I try to speak their language. So you stand out and you feel a little out of place.
Yeah.
I can tell you, I never experienced anything but welcome. Mm-hmm. And I learned a lot from my interactions with those communities. Going there and seeing kind of what they do. And there's a different spirit about certain things. You can do things in a Spanish-speaking parish that you can't do because culturally it wouldn't fit in a parish like St. Pius, as an example. Mm-hmm. That doesn't make St. Pius bad, nor does it make these parishes bad.
Right.
It's simply a recognition that there are certain things that fit culturally for the pastoral care of souls. Mm-hmm. And when you respect the pastoral care of souls and what their culture is that would open them up to these different things, then you can best communicate the gospel.
Yeah.
But if I went into a Spanish-speaking parish and said, here's how we're going to do this, and I kind of laid down your typical suburban parish structure, something's going to get lost.
Yeah.
Something is going to get very, very lost. Mm-hmm. And it's not going to work very well. But when you respect that culture and you recognize the things that they do and you see how beautiful it is, you can say, okay, this is great. Now, let's talk about the things that we share in common as a Catholic faith. So there are certain liturgical elements that are ours no matter what our ethnicity is.
Yeah.
These are cultural things that we share because we're Catholic. Praying the rosary.
Yeah.
This is something that doesn't matter where you go, you're going to find people praying the rosary, right? When we can recognize the good things that are present in a culture and celebrate them and allow them to remain present and to take root, while also recognizing the things that unite us. This is the unity and diversity that we're really speaking about.
Yeah.
We don't all have to look the same. We don't even have to speak the same language, but we have to recognize that there are certain things that do unite us. Now, this is where the Latin language comes in handy, because the Latin language becomes the symbol of our union,
Unity, yeah.
while respecting that diversity. Go back, talking about Mike Aquilina again in his book, Africa and the Early Christian Roots of the Church. He said that Romans would write about Africans, and they would write about their accent. And they'd say, when you listen to them, you might have to pay attention because there's a certain accent that they have, and they would describe what the accent sounded like. So when their vowels might sound this way, so pay attention. Just in the same way that there's a different accent when I speak English versus when somebody from the deep south speaks English.
Oh, yeah.
We're going to sound very different.
Yes. Mature versus mature.
Yeah. There's a difference maybe in even phrases. Think about the differences between American English and British English. Think about the differences between Colombian Spanish and Mexican Spanish and Spanish, Castilian Spanish.
So many differences. Yeah.
There are tons of differences, but it's the same language.
Yeah.
But you can recognize different accents. Well, think about it then with Latin, a foreign language for all of us. But Latin would then have different accents depending on where you're from. I remember a priest I know telling me about being taught Greek by a French professor who was teaching in Latin.
Wow.
Because the language of instruction, this is a long, long time ago, the language of instruction in the seminary was Latin. And so the Greek class was taught in Latin with just going into the Greek things and everything. But it was taught with a French accent.
That sounds like
Can you imagine?
That sounds like a really hard class.
Yeah. But there it is. Like we can pick up all this stuff. We can learn these things.
Yeah.
So there's nothing wrong with the difference in culture. There's nothing wrong with that diversity when we can respect it and really embrace it, something powerful. But when we can also recognize those things that unite us, especially those things that we have in common as a culture, that can build it up. And then when you have your own particular culture that you come from, like the Greeks, and you can really dive into that culture, it gives you a kind of a foundation. This is where I come from.
Yeah.
And even though I can say this is where I come from, there's this other part. There's something more to who I am. I can also interact with all these other places, and I can interact with these other places and other cultures and other people very confidently because I know who I am.
There's a lot there.
Yeah, culture is a never-ending source of fascination, and languages too. I mean, to know these other languages and to be able to dive into what they mean, there's something powerful happening with that as well.
Yeah.
Well, you finished your Baileys, so I think that's as good a time as any to finish this
LOL.
podcast.
I don't have anything to add. I think it's an ongoing conversation. I think that's it. I think being able to just talk about it, bring what your thoughts are to it, and also that's a thing that fascinates me about the Holy Spirit. Like, the Holy Spirit is one, but yet he's so diverse.
Look,
It's
he's so diverse that he got you, a Colombian American, to drink Baileys, an Irish liqueur, which is a French word.
Well, aren't I just a modern
Look,
woman?
folks, I think we've just solved racism and all the diversity questions you could possibly have. I think we've done our job, Paola.
I think so. I guess. Yeah. No.
Paola.
That'll be the day when everyone says my name right.
That's not going to happen.
It's
Come on now.
never gonna happen.
Hey, thanks. This is fun.
Yeah. Thanks, Padre.
Till next week, I'm Father Sam Kachuba.
Paola Peña.
We're like the land.